In the remote wilderness of the Karakoram Range, there existed a glacier that was barely marked on any map. Known locally as Yakh Basti, or the Ice Settlement, it was rumored to be the final resting place of a legendary treasure hidden centuries ago by an ancient caravan fleeing raiders. No one who sought it ever returned, and its mysteries remained shrouded in snow and legend. A group of 4 friends, Ali, Saad, Imran, and Farhan, stood at the foot of this icy expanse, staring at the massive wall of blue-white ice shimmering under the noon sun. They had planned this expedition for months, driven by their shared love for adventure and the allure of unraveling a mystery no one else dared to touch. "You're sure this is the place?" Imran asked, adjusting his backpack. His sharp features betrayed a mix of excitement and skepticism. Ali unfolded an old yellowed map that they had procured from a retired mountain guide in Gilgit. "This is it. The map leads straight through this glacier and ends at what the old man called the Cavern of Echoes. That's where the treasure is supposed to be." "Treasure or no treasure, this place is beautiful," Farhan remarked, his eyes scanning the jagged peaks that surrounded them. He was the calmest of the group, his love for nature often outweighing his concern for danger. "We didn't come for the views," Saad said, his tone brimming with confidence. He was the strongest and most daring among them, always the first to push the limits. "Let's move before the weather turns." The group began their ascent, using crampons and ice axes to navigate the treacherous terrain. The glacier was alive with the creaks and groans of shifting ice, a constant reminder of its instability. Despite the danger, their spirits remained high. They joked and bantered, their voices echoing in the vast emptiness. After hours of climbing, they reached a plateau where the map indicated a hidden entrance. Ali studied the markings carefully, comparing them with the terrain. "There," he said, pointing to a jagged opening in the ice. It was partially obscured by snow, as though nature itself wanted to keep it hidden. Saad was the first to approach, clearing away the snow to reveal a narrow passage leading downward. "This is it," he said, his voice tinged with excitement. "Let's see what's inside." One by one, they squeezed through the entrance, their headlamps illuminating the crystalline walls of the passage. The temperature dropped sharply, and their breaths formed clouds in the icy air. The tunnel led them into a vast cavern, its walls glittering with ice formations that reflected their light like 1,000 tiny mirrors. "Unbelievable," Farhan murmured, his voice filled with awe. In the center of the cavern stood a stone altar, partially encased in ice. On it lay a large chest, its metal bindings corroded with age. Surrounding the altar were 4 stone statues of men, each holding a different object: a sword, a shield, a torch, and a book. "This has to be it," Ali said, stepping closer. As they approached the altar, a deep rumble echoed through the cavern. The ice under their feet trembled, and the statues seemed to shift ever so slightly. Did that just move?" Imran asked, his voice trembling. "You're imagining things," Saad said, though he tightened his grip on his ice axe. Ali carefully examined the chest. It was locked, but the keyhole was large enough to be opened with a tool. Using a metal pick, he worked the mechanism until the lock clicked open. With a deep breath, he lifted the lid. Inside was a collection of items that glittered faintly in the dim light. Golden coins, jewel-encrusted trinkets, and a large, intricately carved medallion. At the center of the medallion was a symbol resembling a sunburst, surrounded by ancient inscriptions. "Jackpot," Saad said, his eyes wide. "This is incredible," Ali said, carefully picking up the medallion. "The craftsmanship. It must be centuries old." But before they could celebrate, the cavern rumbled again. This time, the statues moved unmistakably, their stone limbs grinding as they turned to face the group. Their hollow eyes glowed faintly, and the objects they held began to shimmer. "Tell me that's not real," Farhan said, backing away. "They're just statues," Saad said, though his voice lacked conviction. One of the statues, the one holding the sword, stepped off its pedestal. Its movements were slow but deliberate, and it raised the sword as though preparing to strike. "Run!" Imran shouted. The group scattered, their boots slipping on the icy floor. The statues moved with surprising speed, their heavy footsteps echoing in the cavern. The one with the torch swung its arm, releasing a burst of light that momentarily blinded Saad. He stumbled, barely avoiding the swing of the sword-wielding statue. "This way!" Ali shouted, leading them toward a side tunnel. The tunnel was narrow and winding, forcing them to move single file. The statues followed, their glowing eyes visible in the darkness behind them. "What do we do?" Farhan asked, his voice shaking. Ali glanced at the medallion in his hand. The sunburst symbol seemed to pulse faintly, as though responding to the danger. "I think this medallion is the key," he said. "We need to figure out how to use it." "Figure it out fast," Saad said, glancing back at the pursuing statues. The tunnel opened into another chamber, this one smaller and more contained. In the center was a pedestal with a shallow depression that matched the shape of the medallion. "Put it there!" Imran shouted. Ali rushed to the pedestal and placed the medallion in the depression. The moment it clicked into place, the chamber was bathed in a warm, golden light. The statues froze, their glowing eyes dimming as they crumbled into piles of stone. The group stood in stunned silence, their breaths heavy. "Is it over?" Farhan asked. "I think so," Ali said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. They retrieved the medallion and cautiously made their way back to the surface. The glacier seemed eerily quiet, as though it, too, had been affected by the events in the cavern. As they descended the glacier, the group reflected on their experience. The treasure, though valuable, paled in comparison to the bond they had forged and the story they would carry for the rest of their lives. Back in Marjan, they handed the medallion over to a museum, ensuring it would be preserved and studied. They agreed to keep the details of their adventure to themselves, knowing that some mysteries were better left unsolved. And though they returned to their normal lives, the memory of the whispering caves and the stone guardians would stay with them forever, a reminder of the dangers of greed and the power of friendship. "This way!" Ali shouted, leading them toward a side tunnel. The tunnel was narrow and winding, forcing them to move single file. The statues followed, their glowing eyes visible in the darkness behind them. "What do we do?" Farhan asked, his voice shaking. Ali glanced at the medallion in his hand. The sunburst symbol seemed to pulse faintly, as though responding to the danger. "I think this medallion is the key," he said. "We need to figure out how to use it." "Figure it out fast," Saad said, glancing back at the pursuing statues. The tunnel opened into another chamber, this one smaller and more contained. In the center was a pedestal with a shallow depression that matched the shape of the medallion. "Put it there!" Imran shouted. Ali rushed to the pedestal and placed the medallion in the depression. The moment it clicked into place, the chamber was bathed in a warm, golden light. The statues froze, their glowing eyes dimming as they crumbled into piles of stone. The group stood in stunned silence, their breaths heavy. "Is it over?" Farhan asked. "I think so," Ali said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. They retrieved the medallion and cautiously made their way back to the surface. The glacier seemed eerily quiet, as though it, too, had been affected by the events in the cavern. As they descended the glacier, the group reflected on their experience. The treasure, though valuable, paled in comparison to the bond they had forged and the story they would carry for the rest of their lives. Back in Marjan, they handed the medallion over to a museum, ensuring it would be preserved and studied. They agreed to keep the details of their adventure to themselves, knowing that some mysteries were better left unsolved. And though they returned to their normal lives, the memory of the whispering caves and the stone guardians would stay with them forever, a reminder of the dangers of greed and the power of friendship. It started as an ordinary night in the peaceful town of Highland Falls. The streets were quiet, illuminated by dim streetlights casting long shadows on the cobblestone paths. Inside their homes, people settled into their routines. Parents tucked their children into bed, late-night readers flipped through the pages of novels, and a few restless souls gazed at their screens, scrolling through endless feeds. But by 11:57 p.m., everything changed. Daniel Price, a 42-year-old baker, was the first to notice something unusual. Standing in his kitchen, preparing dough for his early morning batch, he felt a faint vibration underfoot. At first, I thought it was my old refrigerator acting up, he later recalled. But then I saw the flour jar rattling on the counter, and that's when I realized it wasn't the fridge. The vibration quickly intensified. The gentle hum transformed into a deep, guttural growl, as though the earth itself were groaning in discomfort. Windows began to rattle, picture frames fell, and in some houses, small cracks appeared in the walls. By the time the clock struck midnight, Highland Falls was in the grip of a full-blown earthquake. A town awakes. The tremors jolted Samuel Harris, the town's night watchman, from his patrol on Main Street. Leaning against a lamppost and sipping hot coffee from his thermos, he felt the ground shift beneath him. The lamppost swayed like a reed in the wind, and Samuel stumbled, spilling coffee down his uniform. Grabbing his flashlight, he ran toward the town square, his mind racing. He'd never experienced an earthquake before and had no protocol for such an event. All I knew was to stay outside and avoid buildings, but my job is to keep the people safe, and I knew panic would spread fast, Samuel later said. True to his fears, residents began pouring out of their homes. Some clutched emergency kits, others simply stood barefoot in their pajamas, clutching each other for support. The tremors seemed to ebb for a moment, only to return with renewed intensity. Stories from the ground. In one corner of town, 17-year-old Michael Ford was helping his younger brother Jamie out of their house. Jamie was screaming because he thought the ceiling was going to fall, Michael said. Their father, a firefighter on the night shift, had drilled them on safety protocols. I told him to duck under the table, just like Dad taught us, but then we decided to run outside. It felt safer out there. Across town, in a modest apartment above the general store, elderly Mr. Grayson clung to his walking cane as his furniture toppled around him. A retired teacher, Mr. Grayson had lived through several earthquakes in his youth, but admitted this one felt different. It wasn't just the shaking, he said. It was the noise, the rumbling, like an approaching train. That's what scared me. The epicenter of fear. As the quake reached its peak, a loud crack echoed through the hills surrounding Highland Falls. A massive rock slide had occurred on the northern ridge, sending boulders tumbling down onto the town's main access road. The landslide effectively cut Highland Falls off from neighboring areas, leaving the residents isolated. Mayor Thomas Ellis, who had been roused from his sleep, convened an emergency meeting at the town hall's open courtyard. A temporary command center was established under the flickering lights of portable lanterns. We had to act quickly, Mayor Ellis explained. We didn't know the full extent of the damage, but we had to ensure everyone was accounted for. Volunteers were quickly organized. Equipped with flashlights and two-way radios, they fanned out across the town, checking on the elderly and anyone who might be trapped. A community responds. Despite the chaos, the people of Highland Falls showed remarkable resilience. At the local fire station, Captain Henry Scott and his crew worked tirelessly to assess structural damage and provide first aid to those with minor injuries. At St. Peter's Church, Father Nolan opened the doors to those seeking refuge. We had over 50 people huddled together in the pews, he said. There was fear, yes, but also solidarity. People were sharing blankets and comforting one another. It was humbling to see. Meanwhile, Samuel Harris coordinated with local ham radio operators to send out distress signals. The landslide had rendered phone lines useless, and the nearest cell tower was damaged in the quake. A dawn of uncertainty. By the time the first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon, the worst of the earthquake was over. The tremors had ceased, leaving behind a trail of destruction and uncertainty. Walking through the town, Ethan Morris, a young journalist from a nearby city who had come to visit his parents, began documenting the aftermath. The town looked like a scene from a disaster movie, he wrote in his blog later. Shattered windows, fallen trees, and cracks running through the streets like veins on a leaf. Yet, amidst the devastation, there were glimpses of hope. In the town square, a group of teenagers worked together to clear debris. At the bakery, Daniel Price handed out bread to volunteers and emergency workers, saying, "It's the least I can do." The cause and the questions experts later determined that the earthquake measured 5.6 on the Richter scale, with its epicenter located just 10 miles outside Highland Falls. While considered moderate in intensity, its proximity to the town amplified its impact. Geologists visiting the site pointed to the region's underlying fault lines, long dormant but clearly active again. This quake is a reminder that no place is immune to seismic activity, said Dr. Alan Carter, a seismologist. But for the people of Highland Falls, the immediate concern wasn't the science behind the earthquake, it was the recovery. Rebuilding and moving forward. In the days that followed, aid began to trickle into the town. Bulldozers cleared the rock slide, restoring access to the main road. Engineers inspected buildings, deeming some safe while others faced demolition. Funds were raised through community efforts and online campaigns. A local high school organized a fundraiser, and donations poured in from surrounding areas. For the residents, rebuilding wasn't just about repairing homes, it was about restoring their sense of security. "The earthquake shook more than the ground beneath us," said Mayor Ellis. "It shook our sense of normalcy. But we are a strong community, and will overcome this together." Reflections. As the weeks passed, life in Highland Falls gradually returned to normal. The quake became a story people told, a shared memory that bound the community even closer. Michael Ford, the teenager who had saved his brother, was hailed as a local hero. Daniel Price's bakery became a symbol of hope, with customers lining up to thank him for his kindness. Ethan Morris published a feature on the quake, highlighting the town's resilience. "The earthquake was a test, and Highland Falls passed with flying colors," he wrote. "In the face of adversity, the town didn't crumble, it stood tall." And so Highland Falls emerged from the rubble, not just as a place, but as a testament to the power of community and the human spirit.